she asked. "Was I worth $1 to you?" The cowboy answered, "No, you were worth my freedom." The town of Red Hollow sat under a wide-open sky that seemed to stretch forever. Dust moved through its streets like it belonged there, drifting between wooden buildings and hitching posts. The wind carried the smell of hay, leather, and dry earth. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's name, and if they didn't, they knew their story. In Red Hollow, almost everything had a price. Cattle were counted like treasure. Land was spoken of with pride. Even a man's reputation could rise or fall depending on how many acres he owned. People talked about money the way others talked about weather. It was always there, always important. Daniel Hayes walked through town that morning with slow, steady steps. His boots were worn, his hat slightly faded by years of sun. He kept his eyes forward, nodding politely to the few people who greeted him. Some nodded back. Others simply watched. There had been a time when Daniel did not walk alone. Years ago, he had owned a small ranch on the edge of town. It wasn't the biggest, but it was his. He had worked hard for it, waking before sunrise and sleeping long after dark. People respected him then. They used to say he rode like he was born in the saddle, but one harsh winter changed everything. The cold lasted longer than anyone expected. Grass dried up. Water froze. He lost more cattle than he could afford. Bills piled up quietly at first, then all at once. Daniel tried to hold on, but in the end, he had to sell the ranch to cover his debts. Since then, he worked for other ranchers. He fixed fences, trained horses, and joined cattle drives when needed. He never complained. He never asked for pity. But losing his land had changed him. It made him quieter, more careful with his words. As he passed Whitmore's general store, he slowed slightly, though he told himself he didn't mean to. Clara Whitmore stood outside the store, helping her father arrange crates of flour and sugar. The morning light caught her brown hair, tying it back in a simple ribbon. She wore a plain dress, sleeves rolled just enough to show she was not afraid of work. Clara was not like most young women in Red Hollow. She did not giggle behind her hand or lower her eyes when spoken to. She looked directly at people. She listened closely, and when she spoke, she meant what she said. Her father, Mr. Hizzy. Whitmore owned the largest store in town. People respected him because he was fair and steady. He had built his business slowly, one honest deal at a time. Clara had grown up watching him measure flour carefully, never cheating a customer even by mistake. Daniel tipped his hat as he passed. "Morning, Miss Whitmore?" She looked up and gave him a small smile. "Morning, Mr. Hayes." Her voice was calm, but there was something warm in it. Something that had been there for years. They had known each other since they were young. Back when Daniel still had his ranch, he used to come into the store to buy supplies. Clara would help wrap the goods in brown paper, tying the string neatly at the top. Sometimes their fingers brushed. Neither of them ever spoke about it. The town had noticed, of course. Small towns always notice. But nothing ever happened. Daniel never stayed long. Clara never asked him to. Some believed Daniel kept his distance because he had pride. Others believed he simply understood that Clara deserved someone more secure, someone with land and certainty. Daniel continued walking, pushing the thoughts away. He had work to do at Miller's ranch before noon. A fence line needed repair, and the cattle were restless. Behind him, Clara watched for a moment longer than she meant to. "Clara," her father said gently, noticing her pause. "You'll be late opening the doors." "Yes, Papa." By midday, the town grew louder. Wagons rolled in. Horses stamped at the hitching posts. News traveled faster than the wind. And the biggest news that week was the auction. A large piece of land on the south side of Red Hollow was being sold. The owner had moved east after losing too much in the winter. The land wasn't perfect, but it had water and open space. In a town like this, that meant opportunity. People had been talking about it for days. Who would bid? Who could afford it? Whose name would be called when the final price was set? By late afternoon, a crowd gathered near the center of town. A wooden platform had been built quickly for the auctioneer. Men stood with arms crossed, studying one another. Some were confident, others looked nervous. Daniel arrived quietly and stood near the back. He wasn't there to bid on land. He knew better than to step into a game he could not win. But he wanted to see, to listen, to remind himself what ambition looked like. Clara stood near the front beside her father. The store would close early for the event. She watched the crowd carefully, her eyes thoughtful. The auctioneer cleared his throat and began calling out details about the land. His voice carried across the square, strong and practiced. Bidding started slowly, then picked up speed. Numbers rose. Voices overlapped. Pride mixed with excitement. Daniel kept his hands at his sides. He felt something tight in his chest, but he ignored it. He had once dreamed of expanding his ranch, of owning more land than he needed. Now he was simply hoping for steady work through the next season. As the land bidding continued, a smaller item was brought forward. An old horse, thin and tired, tied loosely to a post. "This one's part of the deal," the auctioneer announced. No one wanted to haul him off. "We'll start at $1. The horse lowered its head, ribs faintly visible beneath its coat. It did not look strong. It did not look valuable. "Anyone?" the auctioneer called. "I would be silence." Daniel looked at the animal for a long moment. Something about the way it stood, still, patient, caught his attention. $1, Daniel said calmly. Heads turned. A few whispers rose through the crowd. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. $1 I have? Anyone for $2? No one spoke. Sold. A small wave of laughter passed through the men near the front. "Hay's buying scraps now," someone muttered. Daniel did not respond. He stepped forward, took the rope gently, and stroked the horse's neck. The animal did not pull away. Clara had watched the entire moment. Her expression was unreadable. The land auction continued, louder and more competitive, but something about that single dollar lingered in the air. Near her, 2 men began whispering. "He once said some things aren't worth more than $1, one said quietly. The other chuckled. Guess he meant it. She did not ask what they meant, but the words settled somewhere deep inside her. As the sun dipped lower, the auction ended. A wealthy rancher claimed the land. Handshakes were exchanged. Plans were already being made. Daniel led the old horse slowly out of the square. He moved carefully, as if the animal's weakness was something to protect, not mock. Clara watched him go, her mind turning over the words she had heard. In Red Hollow, people believed they understood value. They measured it in acres, in coins, in cattle. But that evening, as dust rose behind Daniel's boots and the thin horse walked beside him, something unseen had begun to shift. A question had quietly formed in Clara's heart, and before long, she would ask it. The sun had already slipped behind the hills when Daniel led the thin old horse toward the small stable he rented on the edge of town. The sky was painted in soft orange and purple, and the air had turned cooler. Most people were still talking about the auction, about who won the land and how high the price climbed. But Daniel was not thinking about the land. He was thinking about the horse walking quietly beside him. The animal moved slowly, each step careful, as if unsure of its own strength. Its coat was dull and its mane hung unevenly, but its eyes were steady, not wild, not angry, just tired. Daniel tied the rope gently to a wooden post outside the stable. He ran his hand along the horse's neck, feeling the bones beneath the skin. "You've seen better days," he murmured softly. "That makes 2 of us." He brought out a small bucket of water and set it down. The horse drank slowly, not in a rush. Daniel watched closely, making sure it did not strain itself. He had always believed that broken things needed patience more than force. Across town, Clara stood inside her room above the general store. The window was slightly open, letting in the cool evening breeze. She could still hear faint laughter drifting from the saloon down the street. The auction had given people something to talk about, and Red Hollow never wasted a good story. But Clara was not thinking about the land either. She was thinking about the whisper she had heard. "He once said some things aren't worth more than $1. The words had repeated in her mind all evening. She had tried to ignore them while helping her father close the store. She had tried to focus on counting coins and sweeping the wooden floor, but the sentence refused to leave her thoughts. She knew Daniel was not careless with his words. He spoke rarely, and when he did, he chose each word carefully. That was why the rumor troubled her. If he had truly said something like that, he must have meant it. But what had he meant? Clara walked downstairs quietly. Her father was sitting at the small table near the counter, reading an old newspaper by lantern light. "You're still awake," he said gently without looking up. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. He studied her face for a moment. "The auction stirred up the whole town. It will settle by morning." "It's not the auction," she replied softly. Her father folded the newspaper and set it aside. "Is it Daniel Hayes?" "Why would you think that?" He gave a small smile. "Because I've watched you both for years." She sat down across from him, hands folded in her lap. "Papa, have you ever heard him say that some things aren't worth more than $1? Miss Whitmore frowned slightly. "That sounds like something taken out of context." "So he did say it?" "I've heard him speak about pride." about knowing when something costs more than money. He leaned back in his chair. But I've never heard him speak lightly about a person's value. Maybe I misunderstood. Or maybe someone else did, her father replied calmly. But doubt had already settled in her heart. Meanwhile, at the stable, Daniel worked slowly. He brushed the horse with long, careful strokes. Dust fell away, revealing patches of healthier color beneath. The animal flinched at first, but soon relaxed under his steady touch. "You're not worthless," Daniel said quietly. "You're just worn out." A ranch hand from a nearby barn leaned against the doorway, watching with mild curiosity. "You really think that thing's worth the trouble?" Daniel didn't look up. "Everything's worth the trouble if you give it a chance." The ranch hand chuckled. $1. That's all you paid. Daniel finally glanced up. That's all they asked. Later that night, as lanterns dimmed across town, Clara made a decision. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. The streets were quieter now. Only a few voices drifted from the saloon, and the wind carried the faint scent of wood smoke. She walked toward the edge of town, her step steady, but her heart uncertain. When she reached the stable, she paused outside for a moment. Light flickered faintly from within. She could hear the soft sound of brushing and the low murmur of Daniel's voice. She stepped inside. Daniel turned at the sound of footsteps. Surprise crossed his face when he saw her standing there. "Miss Whitmore," he said, lowering the brush. "Is everything all right?" The lantern light cast soft shadows across the wooden walls. The old horse lifted its head slightly, then settled again. "I saw you buy the horse," Clara began, her voice calm but tight beneath the surface. "He needed someone. People were laughing." "I've heard worse," he replied quietly. She took a small step closer. "Why did you buy him?" Daniel looked at the horse before answering. "Because no one else would." "That's not much of a reason. It's enough for me." There was a pause. The air between them felt heavier than usual. Clara gathered her courage. "Did you once say that some things aren't worth more than $1?" Daniel's brow furrowed slightly. "Where did you hear that?" "So you did say it?" "I've said many things," he answered carefully. "You'll have to be more specific." She swallowed. "Did you mean people?" Understanding flickered in his eyes, but confusion followed. "No." "Then what did you mean?" Her voice wavered despite her effort to stay steady. Daniel set the brush down slowly. "Clara, what is this about?" She met his gaze directly, the way she always did, but tonight her eyes held hurt. "Was I worth $1 to you?" The question seemed to echo in the small stable. Even the horse shifted slightly, as if sensing the weight of it. Daniel froze. For a brief moment he could not find his voice. He had faced storms, losses, and long nights alone on the trail, but nothing had prepared him for that question. "What?" he finally managed. "You never fought for me," she continued softly. "You never tried. And tonight, hearing that you believe some things aren't worth more than $1, I need to know." Daniel's heart pounded. He understood now. The whisper. The misunderstanding. But pride and fear tangled inside him. He had spent years convincing himself that distance was kindness, that staying away protected her from the uncertainty of his life. He looked at her, at the hurt in her expression, and the words came out before he could stop them. No. The quiet break behind her eyes. She nodded once, as if she had expected that answer all along. "Thank you for your honesty," she said softly. "Clara, wait," he began, but she turned before he could finish. The lantern light flickered as she stepped out into the night. Daniel stood still, replaying the moment in his mind. He had meant to say more. He had meant to explain that she was never measured in dollars, that she was the one thing he had been afraid to reach for because he believed he could not afford to lose her, that loving her would cost him more than money. It would cost him the freedom to walk away when life became hard. But he had only said one word. No. The cool air stung her cheeks, though she refused to let tears fall. She had asked for truth. Behind her, Daniel finally found his voice, but it was too late. The night swallowed his unfinished sentence. Inside the stable, the old horse shifted again. Daniel rested his hand against its neck and closed his eyes. He had just lost something far more valuable than land. And the town of Red Hollow, which measured everything in dollars, had once again misunderstood the true cost of silence. The morning after Clara walked out of the stable felt different, though the town looked the same. The sun rose over Red Hollow just as it always did, spreading soft golden light across the rooftops and dusty roads. Roosters crowed. Wagons rolled slowly past the general store. Life continued without pause. But inside Daniel Hayes, something had shifted. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Clara standing in the lantern light, her voice steady but wounded. He heard her question again and again. Was I worth $1 to you? And he heard his own answer. No. He had meant something completely different. The rest of the sentence had been waiting on his tongue, but pride and surprise had stolen it from him. Now the damage felt done. Daniel stepped out of the small room behind the stable where he stayed. The old horse lifted its head as soon as it heard him. The animal looked a little more awake than the day before. Its eyes followed him calmly. Well, Daniel said quietly, picking up a bucket, we both need a second chance. He filled the trough with fresh water and brought a small measure of grain. He didn't have much money, so he portioned it carefully. The horse ate slowly, not greedy, as if it understood it had to earn its strength back. Daniel brushed its coat again, long, steady strokes, patient and careful. Dust fell away, and beneath the dull surface, a deeper brown color began to show. It wasn't a miracle. It was simply effort repeated each day. Across town, Clara opened a general store with her father. She moved through her usual tasks, arranging canned goods, weighing sugar, greeting customers, but something in her smile felt thinner. Mrs. Carter, one of the regular customers, noticed it first. You look tired, dear. I didn't sleep much, Clara answered politely. Too much excitement at the auction, the woman guessed. Something like that, Clara replied. Word traveled fast in Red Hollow. By noon, several people had already mentioned Daniel's $1 horse. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. He'll never make that animal worth more than what he paid, one man said near the counter. Clara kept her expression neutral, though the comment stirred something inside her. Later that afternoon, an older ranch hand named Thomas Reed stepped into the store. He had worked alongside Daniel years ago, back when Daniel still owned his ranch. Afternoon, Miss Clara, Thomas said, removing his hat respectfully. Good afternoon, Mr. Reed. He placed a few small items on the counter and lowered his voice slightly. Heard you were at the auction yesterday. Yes, she said carefully. Thomas studied her face for a moment. People talk too much in this town. Clara's fingers paused over the coins. What do you mean? He leaned one elbow on the counter. I heard someone twist Daniel's words. Her heart gave a small, quick beat. Twist them how? A few weeks back, some fellows were teasing him, asking why he never tried courting you proper. One of them joked that maybe you weren't worth the trouble. Clara's breath caught slightly. And what did he say? He said. Thomas replied slowly, remembering clearly. She's worth more than anything I could ever offer. Loving her would cost me my freedom, because I'd give it gladly. Thomas continued. He wasn't speaking about money, he was speaking about choice, about how once a man gives his heart, he doesn't hold anything back. He also said, Thomas added gently, that some things aren't measured in dollars, they're measured in what you're willing to give up. A warm rush of realization spread through her chest, followed quickly by guilt. He never said anyone was worth only $1, Thomas finished. That's foolish talk. Clara swallowed. Thank you for telling me. He's not good with explaining himself. But he's not careless either. After he left, Clara stood very still behind the counter. The pieces began fitting together in her mind, the hesitation in Daniel's eyes, the way he had started to speak before she turned away. She had not let him finish. At the edge of town, Daniel led the old horse in slow circles inside a small fenced area. The animal's steps were weak but steady. Daniel spoke softly as he walked beside it. You're stronger than they think, he murmured. You just forgot. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to the horse or to himself. Several townsfolk passed by and paused to watch. Some still smiled in amusement, but others noticed the quiet dedication in Daniel's movements. Why put in all that effort? One young man called out. You could buy a better horse if you saved long enough. Daniel didn't stop walking. Not everything broken needs replacing, he answered simply. The young man shrugged and walked on. Days passed. Clara avoided the stable at first. She wanted to go, to explain, but pride held her back. She had been the one to confront him. She had demanded an answer, and when he gave one word, she had accepted it without allowing him to finish. At night, she lay awake, replaying the moment. She began to notice small things she had ignored before, how Daniel always carried heavy supplies for her father without being asked, how he stood a little straighter when she entered a room, how he never spoke lightly about anyone's character. Meanwhile, the old horse began to change. Its coat slowly regained a hint of shine. Its back looked less sharp under the skin. Daniel increased the short walks, giving it time to rebuild muscle. He never rushed it, never forced it. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Clara found herself walking toward the edge of town again. She did not plan it. Her feet simply carried her there. She stopped outside the fence where Daniel worked. The horse was moving more smoothly now, its head held slightly higher. Daniel noticed her presence but did not speak immediately. He guided the horse through one more slow circle before bringing it to a stop. "Evening," he said quietly, not looking directly at her. "Evening." Only softness. The wind moved gently through the grass. For a moment, neither of them knew where to begin. "I spoke with Thomas Reed," Clara said finally. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "I see. He told me what you said." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Then you know I never meant—" "I know," she interrupted gently. He looked at her then, really looked at her. Her eyes were no longer guarded. "I should have let you finish," she continued. "That night." "I should have been clearer," he replied. They stood facing each other, the fence between them small but symbolic. "I thought," Clara admitted, "that you believed I wasn't worth fighting for." Daniel shook his head immediately. "Clara, you were the only thing I ever thought was worth giving everything up for. I lost my ranch," he continued softly. "I lost land, cattle, reputation. The only thing I had left was my freedom, the ability to move, to leave if things went wrong again." "And you were afraid of losing that?" she asked. "No," he said quietly. "I was afraid of failing you." "Just truth." He rested his hand on the horse's neck. "This ant not worth more than $1. But I saw something that just needed time. If I walked away because others laughed, it would stay broken. And what do you see when you look at me?" He met her gaze steadily. "I see someone worth more than land, more than pride, more than freedom." The air between them felt different now. Not heavy, but fragile, like something being carefully rebuilt. The horse shifted slightly, brushing its nose against Daniel's shoulder. Clara smiled faintly. "It's getting stronger." "So are we," Daniel replied. For the first time in days, the distance between them began to shrink. Not all at once, but slowly, the way healing always does. In a town that measured value by coins and acres, something far greater was quietly proving itself. And this time neither of them would walk away before the sentence was finished. The days after Clara and Daniel finally spoke, honestly, felt calmer, but not simple. Red Hollow was still the same small town where every glance meant something and every silence was noticed. People watched, people guessed, and people talked. Daniel continued working at the stable each morning before sunrise. The old horse, now looking less like a shadow of itself, moved with more strength each day. Its coat had gained a soft shine. Its steps were firmer. It even lifted its head higher when someone passed by, as if it no longer felt ashamed of being seen. Daniel worked with quiet focus. He repaired fences during the day, helped with cattle when needed, and spent every spare moment with the horse. He never rushed its training. He never forced it beyond what it could handle. He believed real strength came slowly. Clara began visiting more often, though never in a way that invited attention. Sometimes she brought small apples from the store. Sometimes she simply stood near the fence and watched. They did not rush their conversations either. They spoke about simple things at first. The weather, the store, the condition of the grazing fields. But beneath those simple words, something deeper was rebuilding. Still, uncertainty remained. One afternoon, as Daniel tightened the saddle gently across the horse's back, for the first time since buying it, a rider approached from the north road. Dust rose behind the horse's hooves as it came to a stop near the stable. It was Mr. Cowboy, a well-known ranch owner from outside Red Hollow. He was respected for his large cattle drives and steady business. "You Hayes?" Calloway asked, studying Daniel carefully. "Yes, sir." "I've heard you can handle horses most men give up on." "I try." Calloway nodded slowly. "I'm taking a cattle drive north in 2 weeks. It's a long ride. Hard work. Good pay. I need steady hands." Daniel felt something shift inside him. A cattle drive like that meant strong wages. It meant distance from town. It meant opportunity. "How long?" Daniel asked. 3 months, maybe 4, Calloway replied. "If the weather holds." Daniel looked down at the ground for a moment. 3 or 4 months away from Red Hollow. Away from Clara. away from everything uncertain. "I'll give you until tomorrow to decide," Calloway said. "Meet me at the saloon if you're interested." With that, he turned his horse and rode away. Daniel stood very still. The old horse shifted beside him as if sensing the weight of the moment. That evening, Clara arrived just as the sun was setting. She noticed the look on Daniel's face immediately. "What happened?" she asked gently. He rested his hands on the fence rail. "Got offered a place on a cattle drive." Her heart tightened slightly. "That's good pay." "Yes. Maybe 4 months." The words hung in the air. Clara nodded slowly, trying to remain calm. "You always said you liked the open trail." "I did. And now?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked toward the wide horizon beyond town. The open land had always called to him. It was simple, clear. Out there a man answered only to the weather and the cattle. But things were no longer simple. "I don't know," he admitted. Clara folded her hands together. "You don't have to stay because of me. I know. But you don't have to leave because you're afraid either." She had always understood more than he expected. Daniel exhaled slowly. "If I go, I come back with money. Maybe enough to start something small again. A few acres. A chance. And if you stay?" He looked at the horse. "Then I choose something that isn't guaranteed. Nothing important ever is." That night, Daniel lay awake once more. The room behind the stable felt smaller than usual. The offer weighed heavily on him. Freedom had always meant movement, the ability to ride when things became uncertain, the comfort of knowing he did not owe anyone more than he could give. But now, freedom felt different. He thought about the night Clara had asked her question. He thought about how easily one unfinished sentence had nearly cost him everything. The next morning, the town buzzed again. News of the cattle drive spread quickly. Several young men were already planning to join. At the general store, customers mentioned it openly. Hayes would be foolish not to go, one man said while purchasing rope. Good money like that doesn't come often. Clara kept her expression steady, though each comment pressed quietly against her heart. By late afternoon, Daniel saddled the horse once more. This time he mounted carefully. The animal hesitated for only a second before stepping forward. Clara happened to arrive just as he guided the horse into a slow, steady trot. The once broken horse moved with quiet strength. Not perfect, not flawless, but steady. Daniel circled the field once, then brought the horse to a stop near the fence where Clara stood. "He's ready," Clara said softly. "Almost," Daniel replied. She studied him. "And you?" He slid down from the saddle. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he walked toward her, stopping only inches away. "I spent years believing freedom meant never being tied down," he said quietly. "Believing that if I kept moving, I couldn't lose anything. But the truth is," he continued, "I was already tied. To this town, to the memories of what I lost, and to you. If I ride north," he said, "I come back with money, maybe land. But I leave something more important behind." "And if you stay?" she asked gently. "I build slower, harder, but I build here." Silence wrapped around them. But it was not heavy this time. Clara looked past him at the horse. "You chose to stay with him when everyone else laughed?" "Maybe," she continued. "The question isn't whether I was worth $1. He looked at her. "Maybe the question is what you're willing to give up?" The words settled between them with quiet clarity. That evening, Daniel walked into the saloon where Calloway waited. The room was filled with noise and music, but Daniel moved with calm certainty. Calloway looked up as he approached. "You ready to ride?" Daniel shook his head gently. "No, sir." "Good pay." Calloway nodded once. "Your choice." Daniel stepped back outside into the cool night air. The sky above Red Hollow was filled with stars. For the first time in years, the town did not feel like a place he might leave. It felt like a place he had chosen. The next morning, Clara stood outside the general store as Daniel walked toward her. "You didn't go," she said, though she already knew. "No," he replied. "Why?" He smiled slightly, the kind of smile that came from deep certainty. "Because you were never worth $1, he said softly. "You were worth my freedom." This time, there was no unfinished sentence, no misunderstanding, no silence left hanging, and in a town that measured value by money and land, Daniel Hayes had finally chosen something that could not be bought at auction. The morning after Daniel chose to stay in Red Hollow felt brighter than usual, though nothing about the sky had changed. The same wide stretch of blue covered the town. The same dust drifted along the roads. The same wooden signs creaked softly in the wind. But for Daniel Hayes, the world felt steadier. For the first time in years, he had made a choice not out of fear, not out of pride, and not because he had nothing left to lose. He had chosen to stay because he finally understood what mattered most. Clara stood outside the general store when he passed that morning. There was no rush in her movements now, no guarded look in her eyes. When their gazes met, they did not look away. "Morning," she said gently. "Morning," he replied. It was a simple exchange, but it carried something deeper than before. It carried certainty. The town, of course, noticed. By noon, word had spread that Daniel turned down Calloway's cattle drive. Some shook their heads in disbelief. "He could have earned enough to buy land again," one man said, near the water trough. "Foolish," another replied. "Money like that doesn't come twice." But others saw something different. They had watched him work patiently with the old horse. They had seen the way Clara's eyes softened when he was near, and slowly, even the most practical men in town began to wonder if maybe not everything could be counted in coins. Daniel continued his work as usual. He did not boast about his decision. He did not explain it to anyone. He simply showed up each morning and worked harder than before. The old horse, once laughed at, became a quiet symbol in town. Its transformation was impossible to ignore now. Its coat shone in the sunlight. Its stride was smooth and confident. When Daniel rode it through the main street one afternoon, conversations paused. "That can't be the same animal," someone whispered. But it was, and everyone knew it. Clara often watched from the store doorway as Daniel rode past. She saw not just the strength of the horse, but the change in the man riding it. There was less weight on his shoulders, less distance in his eyes. One evening, as the sky turned soft shades of golden pink, Daniel stopped outside the store and dismounted. "Walk with me?" he asked. Clara nodded. They walked toward the open field beyond town where the grass moved gently in the wind. The world felt quiet there, far from the noise of gossip and trade. Daniel removed his hat and held it in his hands, a habit he had when speaking seriously. "I've been thinking," he began. "That's usually a good sign." He chuckled softly. "I don't have much." "Not yet. No ranch. No land with my name on it." "I know," she said. "But I want to build again," he continued, slowly, honestly. "And I don't want to build alone." Her heart beat faster, but she remained calm. "You won't have to." He looked at her carefully. "Are you sure? It won't be easy." "Easy things don't last." For a moment, the wind was the only sound between them. "I spent years thinking freedom meant riding wherever I wanted," Daniel said quietly. "But real freedom is choosing where you belong." "And where do you belong?" she asked softly. He stepped closer, his voice low but certain. "Here. With you. No dramatic promises, just simple truth, spoken clearly." Over the following months, Daniel saved every dollar he earned. He took on extra work when he could. Clara helped by keeping careful records and offering advice about supplies and trade. They spoke openly about their plans, about buying a small piece of land outside town, about raising horses the right way, about building something steady. The town watched with interest. Some still doubted. But doubt grew quieter as results appeared. By the end of the season, Daniel managed to lease a modest patch of land near the creek. It wasn't large, and it certainly wasn't grand, but it was a beginning. The day he placed the first wooden post into the ground, Clara stood beside him. Her father, Mr. Whitmore, joined them, offering quiet support and practical guidance. "You built strong foundations, Mr. Whitmore said, handing Daniel a hammer. "Everything else stands easier." Daniel nodded, understanding the words meant more than just wood and nails. The old horse became the first animal on the land. Children from town sometimes came to see it, curious about the story everyone now knew. "Is that the one he bought for $1?" they would ask. "Yes," Clara would answer with a small smile. One afternoon, a young boy approached Daniel while he repaired a fence. "Mr. Hayes," the boy said, wide-eyed, "why'd you buy that old horse if it wasn't worth much?" Daniel leaned against the fence post, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked toward the horse grazing peacefully nearby. "Because," he said gently, "sometimes things aren't weak. They're just waiting for someone to believe in them." The boy considered that seriously before running off. Years passed, and the small piece of land slowly grew into something more. Not through luck, and not through sudden wealth, but through steady effort and shared purpose. Daniel and Clara built a simple house first. Nothing fancy. Just strong beams, clear windows, and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings. They planted trees, expanded the fence line. They added a few more horses, carefully chosen, carefully trained. Their life was not filled with grand riches, but it was filled with something better: respect, partnership, and quiet happiness. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset over their land, Clara turned to Daniel. "Do you ever regret staying?" she asked. He smiled without hesitation. "Not once." She rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "In a town that counts everything in dollars," she said softly, "you chose something different." Daniel looked across the fields, at the horses grazing peacefully, at the home they built together. "I thought, but I learned that freedom is choosing what's worth holding on to." Clara smiled. The story of the $1 horse became part of Red Hollow's history, not because of the animal itself, but because of what it represented. People began to speak differently when discussing value. They still worked hard. They still counted their cattle and measured their land. But somewhere in their thinking, a quiet understanding grew that worth could not always be measured in coins. And whenever someone joked about something being worth only $1, another would gently say, "Depends on what you're willing to give up for it." On a calm afternoon many years later, Daniel stood beside the now aging horse that had once been thin and forgotten. Its steps were slower again, but this time from a life well lived, not neglect. Clara joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Funny," she said softly, "how $1 changed everything." Daniel nodded, his eyes warm. "It was never about the dollar," he replied. "It was about what I was ready to give." The wind moved through the grass, just as it had the day of the auction long ago. But this time, there was no misunderstanding, no unfinished sentence, only a life built on a choice. And in Red Hollow, where everything once had a price, they had proven that some things are worth far more than money, because they are worth your freedom.